People are still looking for the remains of Noah's Ark. In fact, not too long ago, there were several programs on television dealing with various stories in the Bible and exploring whether all or parts of these accounts were fact or fiction. Two of the shows concerned the ark, one about the flood, which necessitated the building of the ark, and the other about the ark itself. Both were interesting and offered various explanations from scientific and historical perspectives as much as possible for what might have really happened that precipitated these tales. And both shows concluded pretty much that the stories in the Bible could not be taken literally, certainly not in their entirety, but that there was probably something which led to their creation, and that something had historical validity. I think it would be helpful at this point to do a bit of recapping of the story, and then consider some questions that the story raises, as well as some of the theories that have been offered to explain where the stories came from. So, after the Cain and Abel account, we are told that Cain got married and had children, several generations of which are named, and that Adam and Eve had another son named Seth, following which we are given a genealogy which eventually leads to Noah. Now, all these descendants of Adam through Seth lived, including Noah, incredibly long lives, most of them over 900 years. Why and when did that change? Certainly nobody lives nearly that long now. Well, before we get to the flood story, we see that mystical beings called the sons of God were attracted to human females and mated with them. This displeased God, and so he shortened the human lifespan to 120 years, still pretty good even by today's standards. What does this all mean? Well, let's start with those amazing ages. They probably reflect a Near Eastern respect and veneration for the wisdom gained by old age, and so obviously the ancestors most respected and venerated must have lived very long lives. Therefore, the authors gave them very long lives. And what about these sons of God? Were they fallen angels, as suggested by John Milton in Paradise Lost? Were they deities like the Greek and Roman gods who came to earth to consort with human women? Regardless, the projection here is that some ancient fantasy or myth got included in the Noah account because it was too familiar to be ignored, but which nonetheless is inconsistent with the higher faith presented in Genesis. But what does fit is that God was unhappy about what had happened and punished the perpetrators, while the actions of these beings led to the reasons for the flood. Okay, the flood. We are told that the earth was corrupt and that all life on it was corrupt. All life? Even the animals and the fish and the birds and the plants. Animals act by instinct, not thought. So how could they be corrupt? And corrupt plants? Earlier, the reference is to the wickedness of humankind, evidenced by people thinking about nothing but evil and doing nothing but violence, to the extent that God was sorry that he had created them. Therefore, he decided to destroy them all, and I guess the other forms of life had to go as well, because a gigantic flood would not just take people, it would drown everything. Maybe the author realized between writing chapter 6 and chapter 7 that there had to be a reason why the innocent animals would also be destroyed. Therefore, they too were designated as corrupt. Since the fish live under the water, they would not drown, so I guess they were somehow exempt. Corrupt, except Noah and his family. In the whole world, they were the only ones who found favor in the sight of God. Well, God came to Noah and kind of shared his plans for universal destruction. But he wanted to start over without the necessity of doing the whole creation process again. Thus he gave Noah instructions to construct a giant ark and even outlined the building plans in minute detail. When the project was completed, Noah was to get on board with his wife, his sons, his daughters-in-law, and 2 of every life form, along with enough of the right kinds of food to feed them all. That must have been hard on the carnivores, because if they followed their usual diets, they would wipe out entire species that were supposed to be saved. Also, there is a bit of a discrepancy between the end of chapter 6 and the beginning of chapter 7. In chapter 6, the instruction is to bring aboard 1 pair of every animal. In chapter 7, Noah is told to save 7 pairs of all clean animals and 1 pair of unclean, as well as 7 pairs of all birds. Clean and unclean refer to kosher dietary laws later articulated during the Hebrew exodus from Egypt. and the 7 pairs of clean animals and birds would be needed for sacrifices. How can we explain the different numbers? Perhaps by remembering that Genesis had more than one author, and that these stories were tweaked over the centuries, and that some parts were written by priests, so they would be interested in sacrifice as a necessary aspect of worship. Anyhow, Noah did as he was commanded. There they were, shut up in the ark when the rains came. 40 days and 40 nights of rain. In addition, apparently there were flood waters coming from under the earth. Flood waters which the Bible refers to as fountains of the deep. That's a lot of water. The story says that it covered the entire earth. There was so much water, in fact, that even after the rain and the fountain stopped, the ark sailed for 150 days before it landed on the top of Mount Ararat. And it was 3 months after that that the tops of other mountains began to appear. We should note that in between, Noah sent out a raven to see if it could find land, and it flew around until the earth began to dry up. Noah also sent out a dove twice, and when it came back with a twig in its beak, he knew that they could all leave the ark. And so they did. Noah, his family, the animals. This portion of the story concludes with Noah building an altar, sacrificing animals and birds taken from the 7 pairs of clean animals and birds, hearing from God that never again would he destroy the earth in such a fashion, and seeing a rainbow in the sky as a symbol of God's promise. It is generally recognized, certainly among scholars, that the biblical story of the flood is based upon a very similar Sumerian Babylonian legend preserved in the Epic of Gilgamesh. In it, the gods decide to flood the earth, but one of them, Ea, determines to save his favorite mortal, Utnapishtim. As with the Noah story, Utnapishtim is told to build an ark without knowing why, and again, as with Noah, he is supplied with all the dimensions and details. Utnapishtim enters the ark with great numbers of animals, the storm rages, and all humanity is destroyed. In this case, he sends out a dove and a swallow, which return, and a raven, which does not. At that point, he decides that the flood is over, all leave the boat, he builds an altar on which he makes sacrifices, and the gods are pleased. Legends of a universal flood are found in just about every culture, in just about every part of the world, including among American Indians. In each case, these have either been borrowed from other traditions and perhaps revised, or relate to some flood event of a local nature. The biblical account was taken, as said before, with a particularly violent, from the Sumerian Babylonian myth, which probably originated with a particularly violent overflowing of the Euphrates River at some point in that culture's past. And because of geographical proximity, the tale traveled to Palestine to be adopted and adapted by the Hebrews. Also, in a time without communication and mobility as we now know them, major local disasters would be seen as worldwide because for the people experiencing them, these would encompass their entire world. There is one important difference that must be noted regarding these two stories. That is the purposes of the divinities in creating the floods. In the case of most such tales, the gods are malicious and capricious. Why would they do such a horrible thing? Who knows? Perhaps something ticked them off. Perhaps they just wanted to see what it would be like. Perhaps they had a boring day and it gave them something to do. Perhaps they thought it would provide a good laugh. That is not the case with the biblical account. The God of the Bible is never malicious or capricious. There is always a reason for anything and everything he does. And a God of righteousness would certainly not act in a willy-nilly manner, particularly when life was at stake. Here, then, the flood was sent as a punishment for humanity's wickedness. And remember what I've said before, people at that time, and many even today, believed that everything that happened, good or bad, came directly from God. So a great flood, no matter how local, which devastated and destroyed, would be seen as coming from God for a reason. And according to Hebrew theology, such deserved punishment would be the result of and response to people doing bad things. Impossible, right? But how far have we really come in some of these kinds of reasonings and assessments? After 9/11, didn't some religious leaders declare that the wrath of God was descending upon America because of some sin being perpetrated in our country? Always an act which the declarer found to be sinful, like abortion or homosexuality. And didn't Pat Robertson claim a good many years ago that he and his followers had prayed a hurricane away from Virginia Beach, where his headquarters were located, and thus forced it to land in some more ungodly and wicked place? And after every natural disaster of some magnitude, whether tornadoes or volcanoes, tsunamis or cyclones, aren't there always adherents of various faith communities with various religious beliefs who are sure that these were divine acts of retribution sent by an angry God to punish all the sinners always being the other guys? Apparently then, for some folks, geologists and meteorologists and scientists in general don't know what they're talking about. Global warming? Nah. Climate change? Nah. Whether or not the account of Noah's Ark and the flood is a biblical myth or an expanded version of a historical happening, it presents several clear and important messages, and in fact, as do all biblical stories. And perhaps the most clear and important is that evil has consequences. In Noah's day, humanity revolted against God. Created for goodness, people used their free will to do that and act the opposite. And let's face it, when we talk about revolting against God, we are talking about living lives that are hurting and harmful to others. We are talking about breaking over and over and over the golden rule of do unto others as you would have others do unto you. We are talking about living in defiance of what we ourselves perceive to be the will and wishes of the divine. We are talking about letting evil direct our actions, generally for all sorts of selfish reasons. The result? A world of pain and in chaos. We don't have any modern-day tales of worldwide floods sent to punish us for our sins, but we have plenty of horrors to consider which have resulted from our sins. We have had wars which have claimed millions of lives and destroyed entire nations and cultures. We have had different peoples attempt ethnic cleansing, from the Nazis to the Cambodians to the Serbs to the Hutus. And some of that is still going on today, especially between religions and within religions. We have had incredible examples of what humanity is capable of doing to humanity with a complete lack of humanity and with a cruelty which seems impossible and incomprehensible. We have had people do things of which no animal would be capable. So the story of Noah is telling us that we better change, because sooner or later this kind of thing will catch up to us. Change how? Perhaps we begin with new conceptions in our minds which we determine we will see and we will obey. Conceptions of goodness and love which so fill our very beings that there is no room for corrupting thoughts which lead to corrupting actions. That sounds simplistic, I know, but it is a start. If we ever got to the point where at least a majority of the world's people thought first of the welfare of others, what a world that would be. And that, I believe, is a major directive of the Noah story. We can change. We better change, or eventually we are going to wipe ourselves out and everything else with us. Not the happiest thought with which to end a sermon, but certainly realistic. And I will observe that after the flood, God put a rainbow in the sky to show that there is hope. Now it's up to us.